Hello everyone, Refiloe Mpakanyane here. Thank you so much for checking out the special edition of African Tech Roundup as we focus on digital transformation on the African continent. Very, very big topic, a very, very big ask, which is why we've broken down the subject into just a few subtitles or subtopics and speak to 4 thought leaders who can give us some insights into what is possible on the continent. And this is the 3rd conversation that we're having in this series. And I'm really honored about the fact that I was able to spend some time in Franschhoek in the Western Cape, the Silicon Valley of South Africa, and speak to C-suite leaders from across the African continent whose jobs give them a particular insight into what is possible and in fact what is already happening and bubbling under on the continent. Of course, matters of infrastructure, energy, cost challenges have come up aplenty during all these conversations. And I thought, who better than Varun Giridhar, the CEO of Continuous Power Africa, to talk us through the solutions that they bring to the industry in order to enable the telecoms industry to remain ticking over, despite the challenges of lack of electricity or inconsistent power, as well as things like infrastructural challenges. Varun has seen all of these shortcomings as opportunities for innovators, and you'll see how his excitement around a challenge does shine through in our conversation. But for me, what really stood out is the fact that Continuous Power Africa is innovating with an eye to keeping up with the times. And just what are those times that we live in? Well, we are talking climate change, we are talking a just energy transition for the African continent, and most importantly, we're talking sustainability and affordability. Let's check it out.
The pleasure is mine, and I find the space that you play in incredibly fascinating, obviously because of the incredibly important service that you do provide. And I say that as a layperson who knows the pain of cell towers that don't function because of load shedding in South Africa. So it really is my honor to speak to you.
Likewise.
Now, of course, as I mentioned, you're in the position of helping businesses, whether it's telcos, etc., especially telcos, secure reliable power.
Yep.
And that might be scattered telecommunication sites. It might be dealing with site security, and of course monitoring them and all the sort of logistics and plans that come with that. Please talk to me about your solutions and interventions specifically as Continuous Power Africa, what you bring to the table, how big your footprint is, and perhaps you might want to subtweet a few people and talk about how you stack up against your competitors.
Sure. So the company has been built up on a very long history and foundation of technology innovation. So the history of the company goes back to the late 90s. When Inala was originally set up here in South Africa.
Sure.
This was when 2G was all the rage. And Inala had come up with a very clever piece of technology to monitor the power assets and a few other ancillary assets as well that are installed at a 2G site, allowing somebody sitting thousands of kilometers away in a network operations center to be able to see what is happening on the site. And that sort of slowly progressed from being a monitoring tool into remote controlling of assets. So you could switch equipment on and off from a network operations center. Sure. And now, more recently, over the last, I'd say, 5-10 years, it's all about autonomous interventions. So where the hardware itself can actually control what's going on in the site. And the most recent product that we launched, which was around the same time last year, has a very, very intelligent algorithm that has been built in, which acts as the brain for the site when it comes to power generation, power consumption, shifting of power sources, and just energy optimization in general.
Sure.
So we have been able to sort of move forward the legacy of Inala. Inala has changed hands over the course of these many years. It's seen new owners, and we, as a management group, were brought in around 2019, 2020, when a couple of new investors bought the Inala business to create what is today Continuous Power. And what we do today is still very relevant within the African context when it comes to powering mobile mobile telecoms and that entire ecosystem,
Yeah.
fixed line operators, tower companies, etc. We've gone well beyond just looking at monitoring, just looking at intelligence and optimization. We provide power solutions now. That means that we provide hybrid, package solar, wind solutions as well, batteries. It's very topical at this point in time, particularly in South Africa with because of load shedding, etc. So, but having said that, South Africa used to be right at the forefront of technology innovation, and maybe it still is, but definitely on the power side, it's seen a massive setback with what's happening with Eskom. But that doesn't take away from the fact that there's a very strong technology backbone within this country where people are very focused on solving complex problems within the space that are relevant to the rest of Africa as well.
Yeah.
So we do have competitors that are based here in South Africa. We have some based in Israel. But I think the market is big enough that we can all coexist quite peacefully. There are technology companies out there that are doing incredibly intelligent things, very innovative. We're constantly learning from what the rest of the market is doing as well. We'd like to think that we're always ahead of the curve, but not always. So there's definitely learnings that we can take away from others. But in general, I think we have a very strong foothold within this market because of the legacy. People know the brand really well. So when even though we're Continuous Power, some of the discussions that we've been having here, the moment we tell them Inala, something goes off, and they're like, "Oh, we've seen your systems." So they know exactly what we're talking about. They know the legacy of technology innovation. So it becomes easy to then sort of convey what you're looking to convey.
Yeah, I'm glad you did bring up that legacy of research, and I guess that we do have in South Africa, and in many respects in universities as well, and that's largely where it stems from, and in the past with government support. But talk to me about your own research and development process at Continuous Power. What that looks like. What is your approach? What is your view? If I think of a typical phrase from Silicon Valley tech bro, sorry to do this, you might say move fast, break things.
Yeah.
Iterate. But in terms of the, I guess, the utilitarian sort of phrase, in-house, what is your approach?
Very much along those lines. The word that we tend to use is kind of frugal innovation, agile, lean, agile. So a lot of what we do is very much along the lines of what you said. We come up with a concept, we create an MVP of some sort, we test it with a customer, we get feedback. There's a loop, and sometimes it can feel like an unending loop, but there is a loop. And we try and finesse the product or the service to the extent that we can before we implement it. And there's always, within our sector, thankfully, there's always POCs as well, because the chances, if things go wrong, there's a significant impact on the financials of the end user, usually the MNO. You don't want a site to be going down.
Absolutely.
So there's always proof of concepts that act as gating factors. And then you work to a spec as well. So everyone's aware of what is going on. But whenever we do anything innovative that hasn't been done in the market before, then it becomes a bit of a learning process for both sides, for us and the customers.
Sure.
Typically what happens is that we do our internal R&D. We've got a head of engineering. It starts off with a head of R&D who comes up with an idea or a product, does a bit of lab testing. Then it's basically socialized with the customer that we think it's most relevant for. And then we get some feedback, comes back to us as a more kind of finessed product from the head of R&D, moves on to the head of engineering.
Sure.
And the head of engineering is then responsible for commercialization. So he is responsible for how the manufacturing process is going to work, what exactly the component sourcing needs to look like, and that he works with the head of R&D. And then, what needs to be done from both a hardware and a software perspective, because we are a hardware technology company, which means that we do both hardware as well as software. So the intelligence that sits is all as a result of the work that is done by our young associates, most of whom are from University of Stellenbosch and University of Cape Town, so very local in that sense. And there is a process of iteration there as well. There's bug bashing that's done in-house. And then it's finally, there's functional testing that's done in-house, and then we implement it. So there's a long process. Some of these things have very long lead times. So the product that we launched last year was as a result of 2 years of extensive work, development work that went into the entire process. And we're seeing the benefits of it. The product has been installed in over 2,000 sites across the continent, so we're quite pleased with the outcome, and we're really looking to expand our gambit beyond that.
Listen, I missed the bus when they were handing out any aptitude for maths, calculations, anything vaguely related to engineering of any kind. But it sounds fun. It sounds like an incredibly fun environment.
It is, and whenever you're doing something that is innovative technically, there is a certain element of risk that comes with it. So we have a group of people that enjoy that process of innovating, but they also understand they're very responsible when it comes to understanding the risk side of things. So we're very conscious that we should always mitigate any risk when it comes to product failure, which is fundamental to a business like ours. So we try and do that to the extent that we can.
Sure.
And I come from a finance background, so I was trained as an investment banker, qualified as a chartered accountant. So I come from a very different world. But the more I interact with our team as well as the entire ecosystem, it gives me a lot of confidence that technology is what is really going to change the face of the industry from both an efficiency perspective, as well as from the perspective of growth.
Well, expand on that for me, because I guess my next question would have been exactly that. What are the various sort of developments or areas of research or interest that you're particularly excited about in terms of that potential for perhaps the sector at large, but specifically for Continuous Power Africa?
So one of the things that we are working on at the moment is the incorporation of machine learning algorithms into what we do. So we have an energy sort of edge-based intelligent controller that has very smart algorithms that are programmed into it, which allows for autonomous balancing of power systems, essentially. But what we are now doing is essentially collating vast amounts of data to allow for predictive analytics to take place, which means that you're essentially trying to infer out of trends or multiple trends where there are correlations, whether there is a causality that is happening. Sure. And that causality or the establishment of a hypothesis around that causality will then result in a machine learning algorithm that is written to then pick up those events as they start to come by. And that can have a huge impact on the way in which sites are typically managed from a power perspective. If you know that there are 2 or 3 trigger points, which typically turns up because you see the data around it, and you know that those trigger points are interlinked in some way, shape or form, and you know that there's a common cost to it, then it becomes a lot easier to diagnose that problem before it happens, and then come up with corrective action. Yeah. And that's one key focus area for us. And a lot of telecoms operators, particularly tower companies, the likes of American Towers and IHS, these are sophisticated organizations that understand the value of technology. So their sites are pretty well optimized, and if they are not already optimized, they're getting there. Mm-hmm. So for them, the quest is about the next sort of 1% or 2% of efficiency savings, which could be the difference between profitability and a loss. And we're talking, if you start extrapolating these values over 10,000, 20,000 sites, it amounts to millions of dollars.
stacks up, yeah.
Yeah, it really stacks up, particularly in environments like these where you're heavily reliant on diesel. So that is one area that we take very seriously, is how to reduce the use of diesel.
Sure.
It works in two ways. One, you're making the site more cost efficient, but you're also making the site greener. So I think that's something that we're currently working on, and it's a very important focus area for us. Lithium batteries is the other one. We don't manufacture them ourselves, but we've got supply chain partners that we work with. And these batteries are very powerful in helping alleviate some of the issues that we have. And again, how do you optimize the performance of these batteries beyond just what the BMS is able to provide to you is something else we're working on.
Yeah. A final question, a quick one, in fact. I think we've got about a minute to answer that. How you innovate and think about ultimately what you want to create and lean into by way of innovation in the context of the climate change crisis that we're experiencing, off of the back of, in the African context, where we saw the COP27 climate change conference in Egypt, and the final conversation around the culpability of wealthy countries in terms of bringing about this disaster. But, all of that, we're talking about just transitions within our context. We're talking about green energy. How do you innovate within your space with all these things in mind? Of course, you've just mentioned lithium-ion batteries, etc.
Sure. And I think, those are exactly the kinds of things that everyone is doing. So, net zero targets are there. The likes of Orange, American Towers, they've all signed up to 2050 net zero targets. So how can we support these organizations as being part of the supply chain to get there? Towers in Africa are about 10 to 15 times more carbon footprint intensive than their counterparts in Europe. And a lot of it is because grid power that feeds into the towers in Europe come from renewable sources, whereas in Africa they come from coal or some form of dirty power.
Sure.
So how do we then remove the reliance on diesel? I think that's fundamentally the question at this point in time, and reduce site visits. I think that's another huge contributing factor, where you have to drive thousands of miles from an urban center into a rural center, probably with no access roads. Site visits become expensive, they become fuel inefficient. How do you reduce that as well? That's something else that we're working on. How do we bring features that increase automation on site without the need for human intervention? So I think those would be the two areas that I can really see a direct impact that we bring about.
Well, thanks for watching African Tech Roundup Special Edition on digital transformation on the African continent. You can leave your comments and your feedback below. And don't forget to check out the African Tech Roundup podcast on your favorite podcast platform. And of course, subscribe and like there. Check you out next time.